Hello everyone, it's Mimi here. BMS working in the NHS. And today's video will be about haematoxylin staining with and without eosin staining, which is part of the IBMS specialist portfolio in cellular pathology. So, just a quick introduction to this video. It will be short and sweet, I promise. I will discuss indicative repertoire, knowledge requirements, competence requirements, reflective statement, evidence of achievement, Q&A suggestions, evidence ideas, and some helpful tips to make candidates' portfolio really good. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the content of my video and I hope you will learn a lot. So let's dive into the first subsection of the second section, demonstration techniques, called haematoxylin staining with and without eosin staining. The portfolio offers indicative repertoire for this subsection that includes haematoxylin and eosin, PTAH or phosphotungstic acid haematoxylin, and Weigert's haematoxylin. The knowledge requirement explains what knowledge is expected of the candidate in relation to the relevant subsection. Candidates should be able to demonstrate their knowledge at the specialist level. Think about what knowledge they had as a Band 5 BMS. How would that differ to the knowledge of a Band 6 BMS? That specialist level of knowledge would allow the candidate to troubleshoot, problem solve, verify or validate. The first knowledge requirement is different types of haematoxylin formulae. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about various haematoxylin formulae. You could ask the candidate to name different types of haematoxylin formulae, to give examples for each, to explain how the formulae differ and when would they use each one of them, to state what staining methodology they are used in, to name key components of haematoxylin formulae. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider alum haematoxylin like Myers or Harris's, iron haematoxylin like Weigert's or Verhoef's, tungsten haematoxylin like phosphotungstic acid heme, molybdenum haematoxylin like Thomas's or lead haematoxylin, the key components in the formulation like oxidizers used to convert oxalin to hematine, which is an active dye, like air and light or sodium iodate, mordants that improve binding of the dye to the tissue like iron or alum, acids that refine staining specificity and selectivity like acetic acid, or stabilizers that prevent scum formation like glycerol. The second knowledge requirement is haematoxylin to hematine oxidation process and its control. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about oxidation of haematoxylin to hematine. You could ask the candidate to explain, what is hematine, what is involved in oxidation process of haematoxylin to hematine, how to control this oxidation process, what does the oxidation process lead to. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider natural oxidation by air and light, chemical oxidation by sodium iodate or potassium permanganate, process involving loss of hydrogen, conversion from colorless to dark red-brown solution, pH adjustment with acids, stabilizers like glycerin, storage, temperature, aging. The third knowledge requirement is advantages, disadvantages, and use of haematoxylins made with the following mordants: alum, iron, lead. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about the advantages and disadvantages of various haematoxylins. You could ask the candidate to explain, what is mordant and how it works, name mordants that can be used in association with haematoxylin, to explain how different mordants influence staining characteristics of haematoxylin, to list advantages and disadvantages of each mordant. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider affinity, stable linkage, final color, versatility, stability or instability of use, primary use, contrast, complexity, selectivity, toxicity, and so on. The fourth knowledge requirement is staining mechanism of alum haematoxylin. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about the staining mechanism of alum haematoxylin. You could ask the candidate to explain the staining mechanism of alum haematoxylin, to explain mordant, lake formation or tissue affinity, to state the role of differentiation and bluing during staining. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider oxidation to form hematine, mordant to act as a bridge between the tissue and the dye, lake formation to form aluminum hematine complex, tissue affinity to anionic or basophilic structures like DNA or RNA, staining mode, regressive, bluing to neutralize excess acid and convert soluble red dye to insoluble blue complex, and counterstaining to provide contrast. The fifth knowledge requirement is principles of haematoxylin and eosin staining and the value of it as the primary diagnostic stain in cellular pathology. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about the principles and diagnostic value of H&E staining. You could ask the candidate to explain the principle of H&E staining, explain the staining mode, to name structures that are highlighted by H&E staining, to list steps involved during H&E staining, and to explain the value of H&E staining as a primary diagnostic stain. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider staining mode, color, affinity, stain structures, contrast, and steps involved. Values such as clear visualization, providing diagnostic foundation, context for further staining and baseline for advanced staining, cost-effectiveness, durability, versatility, providing detailed morphology, efficiency, and so on. The sixth knowledge requirement is review cases and material microscopically for internal and external quality control. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about QC of H&E stained slides. You could ask the candidate to explain how they would assess quality of H&E stained section, to name tissue areas they would focus on, to list criteria used to assess quality, to explain the process for H&E EQA assessment. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider color consistency, nuclear detail, uniformity of staining, presence of background staining, presence of nonspecific staining, presence of various shades of eosin staining, EQ assessment criteria, documentation. The seventh knowledge requirement is use of automated staining machines. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about automated staining machines. You could ask the candidate to explain how to perform automated H&E staining, to list the benefits of automated staining, to compare automated and manual staining, to list various automated staining machines. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider efficiency, throughput, consistency, reproducibility, quality, cost-effectiveness, safety, workflow, cross-contamination, scalability, maintenance, and so on. The eighth knowledge requirement is monitor the quality of haematoxylin and eosin staining. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about monitoring quality of H&E staining. You could ask the candidate to explain how they would monitor quality of H&E staining in your lab, to list common quality issues associated with H&E staining, to explain how they would resolve them, to state how often is the quality monitored, to explain how this monitoring is recorded. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider daily monitoring, record keeping, change of reagents, role of digital image analysis, role of IQC and EQA slides, verification and validation of reagents. The ninth knowledge requirement is risks and hazards associated with the preparation and disposal of reagents used in haematoxylin and eosin staining. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about risks and hazards associated with H&E staining reagents. You could ask the candidate to name the risks and hazards associated with use, preparation, and disposal of reagents used during H&E staining, to explain how they would minimize them, to explain the disposal methods for reagents. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider health hazards, physical hazards, environmental hazard, disposal methods used, risk assessments, regulatory bodies like COSH, HSE, or Ritter, substitutes available to reduce risks and hazards, preventive measures like PPE, ventilation, waste segregation, and safe handling. Competence requirement is basically a combination of knowledge, skills, and experience candidate needs to perform a job to a satisfactory standard. Candidates' chosen evidence should demonstrate these competence requirements. The following competence requirements need to be met for this subsection. The first competence requirement is follow demonstration methods accurately. Candidates should be able to accurately follow demonstration methods. Can the candidate perform H&E staining in your lab? Do they use manual or automated method? Do they know if the demonstration method worked correctly? Do they follow local methodologies and SOPs during staining? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider SOPs, method used, quality control, use of control material, their training, competency, the importance of following the methods accurately. The second competence requirement is select and use the correct haematoxylin and eosin solution, maintaining appropriate records. Candidates should be able to use correct solutions during H&E staining and maintain records. Does the candidate select and use correct solutions during H&E staining? Do they correctly use different haematoxylins in different circumstances? Do they maintain appropriate record documentation for H&E staining? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider rapid H&E staining for FS, routine automated H&E staining, manual H&E staining, solutions that are used for each method, record keeping. The third competence requirement is select and use the appropriate control materials, maintaining audit trails, as appropriate. Candidate should be able to use correct control material. Does the candidate use correct control material for H&E staining? Do they maintain accurate audit trail for control material used? Do they know how to produce appropriate control material for H&E staining? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider tissue types they would use, verification, validation of control material, record keeping for control blocks and control slides, disposal of control material, traceability for samples used, audit trail, importance of selecting correct control material, consequences of not using correct controls. The fourth competence requirement is use appropriate microscopy techniques to visualize methods. Candidate should be able to view H&E stained slides microscopically. Does the candidate correctly view H&E stained slides via microscope? Do they use correct microscope to visualize stained slides? Do they set up and use microscope correctly? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider light microscopy, magnification, Kohler's illumination, digital image assessment. The fifth competence requirement is assess stained sections for quality. Candidate should be able to assess quality of stained sections. Does the candidate assess H&E stained section for quality correctly? Do they take correct steps during the assessment? Do they focus on correct features when assessing quality of H&E staining? Do they maintain appropriate audit trail? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider color consistency, nuclear detail, uniformity, specificity, presence of background, consistency of staining, presence of nonspecific staining, shades of eosin staining present, EQA assessment criteria. The sixth competence requirement is resolve any problems associated with the staining method, including root cause analysis, as appropriate. Candidate should be able to troubleshoot H&E staining. Does the candidate resolve problems with H&E staining? Can they identify and solve the common problems? Do they record problem resolutions accurately? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider investigation, problem identification, corrective actions to fix the issue, preventive actions to minimize problems from reoccurring, possible problems like poor staining intensity, poor specificity of staining, artifacts like uneven staining, hazy nuclear bubbling, presence of deposits or precipitate on the slide, reagent contamination, and so on. The seventh competence requirement is dispose of waste reagents safely. Candidate should be able to safely dispose waste reagents. Does the candidate dispose staining reagents safely? Do they follow local procedures and avoid risks associated with H&E staining reagents? Do they segregate waste as per regulation? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider licensed contractors used by your lab, waste segregation, safety data sheet of reagents that often state disposal ways, risk assessments, local policies, and regulations that are followed, health and safety risks associated with reagents like flammability, corrosivity, environmental toxicity. The eighth competence requirement is perform basic maintenance on automated staining machines and slide cover slippers. Candidate should be able to perform maintenance on instruments used during H&E staining. Does the candidate perform basic maintenance of the H&E stainer and cover slipper used in your lab? Do they record maintenance regularly and accurately? Do they follow local methodology and SOPs when performing maintenance? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider SOPs, reagent change, routine cleaning of the equipment, regular decontamination, monitoring of reagent evaporation and reagent levels, reagent rotation, stain filtering, if needed, associated record keeping and documentation. Each section also contains reflective statement, which is asking the candidate to summarize their role in the lab in the context with each section. When they complete all the subsections within each section, they will be required to write a reflective statement. They also need to write a personal reflection on their training and why they chose their evidence. To prepare for that, ask them to write a smaller reflective statement for each subsection. What is their role and context of this subsection within the lab? What does their evidence demonstrate? Ask them to write a smaller justification as to why they chose their evidence for this subsection. Also ask them to write about what was their training like when it's to this subsection. Writing a smaller reflective statement at the end of each subsection will then make it much easier for them at the end of the section. Each subsection also has evidence of achievement. This is a part where you, the training officer, sign the candidate off as competent and fit to practice as a BMS at the specialist level. By doing that, you will confirm that the candidate can work in accordance with local SOPs relevant to this subsection. This will also confirm that candidate has answered questions set by you to test their knowledge and skills relevant to this subsection. And you will also confirm that candidate's chosen evidence demonstrates their competence relevant to this subsection. The candidate will need to be signed off as competent by an internal assessor for each subsection. They can be signed off by you, the training officer, senior BMS overseeing relevant section, or by the training lead. These are some example questions you could give your candidate to test their knowledge and skills about this subsection. These should be based around the knowledge and skill requirements mentioned earlier. These are some more example questions you can ask your candidate to complete, to test their knowledge and skills about this subsection. You could ask the candidate to complete tables you created, based on knowledge requirements. Supporting evidence should be selected by the candidate. It needs to be based around the competency requirements, and be relevant for each subsection. The evidence should allow the candidate to demonstrate their competence in each subsection. It should be specific and relevant to the candidate's in-house practice. It should also demonstrate candidate's specialist competence. If you would like to see specific ideas for supportive evidence, please have a look at the video for trainees. Link will be included in the video description. I would also like to share with you some helpful tips that can make candidates' portfolio look really good. Ask them to try and present the information in various formats such as tables, pictures, photographs, diagrams, flowcharts, graphs, or even videos, if they can. This nicely breaks down a lot of text that is usually present in specialist portfolios. Ask them to try and make it a little bit more interesting to the reader, which will be you, and eventually the assessor. Ask them to try and put themselves in your or the assessor's shoes. How would they like to read hundreds of pages of plain text? There is a saying I really like, and it goes like this: a picture 1,000 words. I will make a video where I will share with you my evidence I used for my portfolio back in the day. Hopefully that will help. Also ask them to try and use various types of evidence, not just one type, like case studies, for each subsection. They could use experiments, case studies, annotated results, annotated photographs of them performing tasks, evidence of troubleshooting, annotated EQA results, nonconformances, validation verification evidence, comparisons of different approaches and their pros and cons, control material production, certificates of course attendance with reflective statements, annotated images or charts, and so on. Ask them to try and bring in their personality. Ask them to think about the ways they like to learn best. If experimenting, let them perform experiments. If they like troubleshooting, let them perform troubleshooting. Ask them to choose something that demonstrates their specialist understanding, knowledge, and skills, and how they apply this in their practice. And one more thing, ask them to keep the competence requirements in mind when they are selecting their evidence. Good evidence will tick off several requirements. And this brings me to the end of today's video. Hopefully you now have a better understanding about the knowledge and competence requirements for this subsection. And I hope you also have a better idea what questions you can choose to test candidates' knowledge. And my final take-home message? Keep those requirements in mind when selecting questions and guiding the candidate. Bye for now.